One of the best habits you can develop while caravanning is having a simple morning check routine before you get back on the road. Because honestly, when people first start traveling with a caravan, mornings can feel a little rushed. Packing things away, thinking about the next destination, checking maps, getting organized, and during that rush, it becomes very easy to forget small things. I remember during some of my early trips constantly feeling worried that I'd forgotten something important before driving away. And honestly, that mental uncertainty creates unnecessary stress. But eventually, I realized something very simple. A calm morning routine solves most of those problems. And once I developed a consistent system, traveling became dramatically easier and more relaxing. So in this video, I want to walk you through the simple things you should check every morning while traveling with a caravan, not overcomplicated checklists. Just practical habits that help you stay safe, organized, and stress-free on the road. Now, the very first thing I always recommend checking is your surroundings before you even begin packing up, because overnight, things can change around your campsite. Power leads, water hoses, objects near the caravan, weather conditions, ground conditions. I remember once noticing soft ground around my tires after overnight rain, and honestly, that simple observation changed how carefully I packed up that morning. And that's why awareness matters before you rush into departure mode. Now let's talk about tires, because tires are one of the most important things to check before traveling, both on the vehicle and the caravan. You don't need to become obsessive about it, but a simple visual inspection every morning is a very good habit. Tire condition, obvious damage, anything unusual. I remember how quickly tire awareness became part of my normal routine once I started traveling regularly. And honestly, small habits like that create long-term safety. Now let's talk about hitch connection, because this is something beginners often feel nervous about at first. And honestly, that's understandable. Your caravan connection is one of the most important parts of towing safely. So every morning before driving, it's important to calmly check your hitch, safety chains, electrical connection, and anything related to towing setup. I remember double checking everything repeatedly during my early trips because I was worried about missing something. But eventually, those checks became automatic habits instead of nervous overthinking. Now let's talk about lights, because checking your caravan lights before leaving is another very simple but important habit. Brake lights, indicators, tail lights. It only takes a moment, but it helps prevent problems later on the road. And honestly, small consistent checks are what create confident caravanning long term. Now let's talk about storage and loose items, because one thing beginners quickly learn is that caravans do not like loose objects while traveling. Cupboards, drawers, benches, outdoor gear. I remember early trips where I forgot to properly secure simple things inside the caravan and quickly learned why organization matters before driving. And honestly, once you hear things moving around while towing, you never forget to secure them again. Now let's talk about power and water connections, because this is one of the easiest things to forget when you're rushing. Disconnecting power properly, disconnecting hoses, packing cables away safely. I remember becoming much more methodical about this after nearly driving off once before disconnecting everything properly. And honestly, almost every caravaner has moments like that early on. That's why routines matter so much. Now let's talk about weather, because weather should absolutely influence your driving plans each morning. Strong winds, heavy rain, extreme heat, road conditions. I remember learning quickly that checking weather conditions before driving helped me feel much calmer and more prepared throughout the day. And honestly, preparation removes a huge amount of unnecessary stress. Now let's talk about mirrors and visibility, because before towing each morning, it's important to make sure mirrors are properly positioned and visibility is clear. Sometimes small adjustments make a big difference once you're back on the road. And honestly, those little setup habits create much more relaxed driving. Now, let's talk about your mindset before driving, because this is something people rarely talk about enough. How you feel mentally before driving matters. Are you rushing, tired, distracted, stressed? I remember realizing during early trips that calm mornings usually created calm driving days, but rushed mornings often created unnecessary tension for the rest of the trip. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons morning routines matter so much. Now let's talk about route planning, because another good morning habit is simply reviewing the day ahead before leaving, driving distance, fuel stops, road conditions, arrival plans, nothing overcomplicated, just enough awareness so you're not making rushed decisions later on the road. I remember how much more relaxed I felt once I started planning days more intentionally instead of improvising constantly. Now let's talk about water and power levels for a moment, because depending on your setup, it's useful to understand where your resources are sitting before heading off, especially if you're free camping or traveling long distances. And honestly, those small awareness habits make traveling feel much smoother long term. Now, here's something really important beginners should understand. Morning checks are not about fear, they're about confidence, because confidence comes from knowing you've taken a few simple steps to prepare properly before traveling. And honestly, once those routines become automatic, mornings become far less stressful and far more enjoyable. Now, here's the key idea from this first part. A calm, consistent morning routine removes uncertainty, and once uncertainty disappears, traveling starts feeling much more relaxed, organized, and enjoyable every single day. Now that we've covered the core morning safety and setup checks, let's move into some of the smaller habits that make a surprisingly big difference once you're traveling regularly. Because honestly, it's usually not the big dramatic mistakes that create stress while caravanning. It's the small overlooked things. And I remember learning that very quickly during my early trips. Little moments where I'd realize I should have checked that before leaving. And those small experiences slowly taught me how valuable simple routines really are. Now let's talk about interior organization, because one thing beginners often underestimate is how much movement happens inside a caravan while towing. Cupboards shift, items slide around, doors move, and honestly, the first time you hear unexpected noises while driving, it definitely gets your attention. I remember early trips where I forgot to properly secure a few simple things inside the caravan. Nothing major happened, but it quickly taught me the importance of doing a calm walkthrough before departure, checking benches, cupboards, fridge doors, loose objects, and once that became routine, towing felt much more relaxed. Now let's talk about external storage areas, because this is another easy thing to overlook when mornings feel rushed. Tunnel boots, storage hatches, gas bottle compartments, outdoor equipment. I remember once driving a short distance before realizing I'd forgotten to properly secure an external hatch. And honestly, experiences like that create habits very quickly. That's why simple visual checks around the outside of the caravan are so valuable before driving away. Now let's talk about stabilizer legs, because this is one of the classic beginner mistakes almost everyone worries about. Forgetting to fully raise stabilizer legs before towing. And honestly, that fear is completely normal when you're learning. I remember double checking mine constantly during early trips because I was terrified of forgetting them. But eventually it became part of a reliable departure sequence. And that's really what morning checks become over time, a consistent sequence that removes uncertainty. Now let's talk about steps and entry doors, because these are small things that are very easy to overlook when your attention is focused elsewhere. I remember how much easier mornings became once I stopped trying to mentally juggle everything randomly and instead followed the same routine every time. Door, steps, windows, hatches, connections. Simple systems reduce mental overload dramatically. Now let's talk about windows and roof hatches, because weather changes quickly while traveling, wind pressure changes, road vibration changes, and ensuring everything is properly closed before towing is such a simple but important habit. I remember once hearing unusual wind noise during towing and realizing I hadn't properly secured a roof hatch. Again, not a major disaster, but another reminder that simple checks prevent unnecessary stress later. Now let's talk about awnings for a moment, because awnings are one of those things beginners become extremely cautious about after hearing enough stories from other caravanners. And honestly, for good reason. Awnings need to be packed away properly and securely before traveling. I remember becoming very methodical about awning checks early on because I quickly realized how much damage strong wind can create if things are not secured properly. Now let's talk about fuel, because fuel planning is something that becomes part of normal travel thinking surprisingly quickly. Where's the next fuel stop? How far are you traveling? Are conditions affecting fuel use? I remember feeling much calmer once I stopped leaving fuel decisions until the last minute, because uncertainty creates stress very quickly when towing. Now let's talk about fatigue again, because how you slept the night before matters. How you feel mentally matters. And honestly, beginners sometimes underestimate how much concentration towing requires. I remember some mornings where I realized I was more tired than I initially thought. And learning to acknowledge that instead of ignoring it became very important for safe traveling. Now let's talk about weather conditions one more time, because this genuinely affects daily decision making far more than beginners expect. Strong wind warnings, heavy rain, extreme heat, road closures, and honestly, one of the smartest habits you can develop is adjusting plans based on conditions instead of stubbornly sticking to schedules. I remember learning that flexibility dramatically reduced stress during trips. Now let's talk about communication if you're traveling with someone else, because calm communication during pack up and departure makes mornings much smoother. Simple responsibilities, simple checks, simple communication. I remember how much easier mornings became once departure routines became calm and organized instead of rushed and chaotic. Now let's talk about time pressure. Because honestly, one of the biggest mistakes beginners make is trying to leave too quickly. Rushing creates forgotten items, missed checks, stress, and stressful departures often create stressful driving days. I remember realizing that allowing extra time each morning completely changed how relaxed traveling felt overall. Now, here's something really important. Morning checks are not about creating complicated systems, they're about reducing mental load. Because once you know certain things have been checked properly, your brain relaxes, and relaxed drivers make better decisions. Now let's talk about confidence again, because morning routines build confidence in a very quiet but powerful way. Every successful departure reinforces trust in your systems, and eventually, what once felt overwhelming simply becomes part of normal caravan life. I remember being surprised how automatic my morning routine became after a while. And honestly, that familiarity made traveling feel dramatically more enjoyable. Now, here's the key idea from this part. The best morning caravan routines are simple, calm, and repeatable, because consistency removes stress, prevents mistakes, and helps every travel day start in a far more relaxed and confident way. Now that we've talked about practical morning checks and how routines help reduce stress while traveling, I want to move into something deeper that beginners often don't realize at first, and that's how much your mindset affects your entire travel day. Because honestly, caravanning becomes dramatically easier once you stop approaching mornings with pressure and start approaching them with calm awareness instead. I remember during my early trips waking up already thinking ahead. The drive, the next destination, fuel stops, setup, arrival times, and without realizing it, I was creating stress before the day had even properly started. But eventually I noticed something really important. The mornings where I felt calm usually became the best travel days. And the mornings where I rushed everything usually created unnecessary problems later on. That was a huge mindset shift for me. Now let's talk about pace, because caravanning teaches you very quickly that rushing rarely helps anything. Rushing pack up, rushing hitch checks, rushing route planning, rushing departure. And honestly, most small caravan mistakes happen when people feel pressured or distracted. I remember forgetting simple things during rushed mornings that I would never normally forget. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because my attention was scattered. And once I slowed down mentally, everything became much smoother. Now let's talk about awareness, because one of the biggest things caravanning teaches you is situational awareness. Road conditions, weather, tires, weight distribution, fuel, wind. And at first, that constant awareness can feel mentally exhausting. I remember during my first trips feeling like my brain was always on, always checking something, always thinking ahead. But eventually, those awareness habits stopped feeling stressful and simply became normal routines. And honestly, that transition happens much faster than most beginners expect. Now let's talk about confidence again, because confidence while traveling rarely comes from knowing everything perfectly. It comes from trusting your systems, your routines, your habits. I remember realizing after a while that I no longer felt nervous every morning before departure, not because I suddenly became an expert, but because I trusted my process. And honestly, that trust changes everything emotionally. Now let's talk about flexibility, because this is one of the biggest lessons caravanning teaches people. Sometimes conditions change, roads change, weather changes, plans change, and beginners often feel stressed when things stop going according to plan. I definitely did at first, but eventually I realized something incredibly important. Flexible travelers enjoy caravanning far more than rigid travelers, because flexibility removes pressure, and pressure is what creates stress. Now let's talk about decision making, because good morning routines help create better decisions throughout the entire day. When you leave calmly, organized, and prepared, you think more clearly while driving, you notice things earlier, you respond more calmly to unexpected situations. I remember realizing that calm mornings seem to improve every part of the travel experience afterward. And honestly, that's why routines matter far beyond simple safety checks. Now let's talk about emotional energy, because towing requires concentration, and concentration uses mental energy. Beginners often underestimate this completely. I remember some early travel days where I arrived feeling mentally exhausted simply because my brain had been processing so much unfamiliar information. But over time, as routines became automatic, that mental fatigue reduced dramatically, and suddenly traveling started feeling relaxing instead of mentally demanding. Now let's talk about self-trust, because morning routines quietly build self-trust over time. You complete successful departures, you handle situations calmly, you solve small problems, and gradually you stop doubting yourself constantly. I remember realizing one day that I had stopped second guessing every small decision before leaving campgrounds. And honestly, that was one of the biggest signs that confidence had started becoming natural. Now let's talk about the emotional side of mornings while traveling, because honestly, mornings caravanning can become some of the most peaceful moments of the entire lifestyle. Quiet campsites, cool air, coffee outside, slow preparation, and once stress disappears from your routine, you start actually enjoying those moments instead of rushing through them. I remember during some trips sitting quietly outside before departure and realizing how mentally calm I felt compared to normal life. And honestly, that slower pace became one of my favorite parts of caravanning. Now let's talk about mistakes one more time, because beginners need to understand that small mistakes will still happen sometimes. Everyone forgets things occasionally, everyone misses little details sometimes, even experienced caravanners. And honestly, the goal is not perfection. The goal is reducing avoidable stress through simple, consistent habits. That's it. Now, here's something really important. The best caravanning routines are not the most complicated ones, they are the most repeatable ones, because repeatable systems create familiarity, and familiarity creates confidence. Now, here's the key idea from this part. Morning checks are not just about preparing the caravan, they are about preparing your mindset, because calm mornings create calm driving, better decisions, and far more enjoyable travel experiences overall. Now, as we bring everything together, I want to leave you with something that honestly changed the entire way I experienced traveling with a caravan. The less rushed your mornings become, the more enjoyable caravanning becomes overall. And I genuinely didn't realize how important that was during my early trips. At the beginning, I treated mornings like tasks that needed to be completed quickly. Pack up, leave early, get moving, reach the next destination. But eventually, I realized something really important. Caravanning is not supposed to feel rushed. And the moment I stopped treating mornings like a race, everything started feeling calmer, smoother, and far more enjoyable. Now let's bring everything back to the key habits from this video. Check your surroundings before departure. Inspect tires visually. Check hitch connections, safety chains, and electrical connections. Secure loose items inside the caravan. Close windows, hatches, and external compartments. Check stabilizer legs and steps. Pack away power leads and water hoses properly. Review weather conditions and route plans, check mirrors and visibility, and most importantly, slow down mentally before driving, because honestly, those simple habits prevent most unnecessary travel stress. Now let's talk about confidence one more time, because morning routines quietly build confidence in a very powerful way. Every calm departure tells your brain something important. You are prepared, you are organized, you are capable, and over time, that self trust becomes automatic. I remember during early trips constantly feeling worried that I'd forgotten something. But eventually, routines replaced uncertainty. And once uncertainty disappeared, traveling became dramatically more relaxing. Now let's talk about consistency, because consistency matters much more than complexity. You do not need massive checklists. You do not need complicated systems. You simply need a calm, repeatable routine that works for you. And honestly, that's what experienced caravanners eventually develop naturally. Simple habits repeated consistently. Now let's talk about flexibility one more time, because even with great routines, things will still change sometimes. Weather changes, roads change, plans change, and honestly, flexibility is one of the most valuable skills caravanning teaches people. I remember learning that the more adaptable I became mentally, the more enjoyable every trip became, because rigid expectations create pressure. Flexible thinking creates calmness. Now let's talk about enjoyment, because this is really what all these routines are designed to protect: the enjoyment of the lifestyle itself, the freedom, the slower pace, the peaceful mornings, the relaxed travel days. And honestly, simple routines help protect those experiences by reducing unnecessary stress. Now let's talk about beginners for a moment, because if you're new to caravanning, it's completely normal to feel mentally overloaded during early trips. You're learning new systems, new routines, new responsibilities. I remember feeling exactly the same way, but what surprised me most was how quickly things started becoming automatic once I traveled more regularly. And honestly, that transition happens much faster than most beginners expect. Now, let's talk about mistakes one final time because everyone forgets things occasionally. Everyone has rushed mornings sometimes. Everyone learns through small experiences. And honestly, those experiences are what eventually shape reliable routines. That's why beginners should stop expecting perfection and instead focus on progress. Now, here's something I really want every traveler to remember. The goal is not creating perfect travel days. The goal is creating calmer travel days because calmness improves almost every part of caravanning. Driving becomes easier, decision making becomes clearer, setups become smoother, and the entire experience becomes far more enjoyable emotionally. I still remember the moment morning stopped feeling stressful and started feeling peaceful. And honestly, that shift completely changed how I experienced traveling because once routines became natural, caravanning no longer felt mentally exhausting. It simply felt like life on the road. Now, if you're traveling with a caravan, here's the best advice I can give you. Create a simple morning routine. Keep it calm. Keep it consistent. Allow extra time and stop rushing yourself unnecessarily. Because the calmer your mornings become, the more relaxed, confident, and enjoyable your entire travel experience becomes. And if you want more simple, practical caravanning advice like this, make sure you hit subscribe because I'll be helping you every step of the way.